This might be the fastest and easiest coaster that you can sew. And if you want to do some fussy cutting, I have a free template for you to download. Everything in the cutouts will end up in the top of the coaster, and I use it to avoid the blue. To make your own, you need 5 squares of fabric, 4 for the top of the coaster and 1 for the backing. And since you only need small pieces of fabric, it's perfect to use up some fabric scraps. First, you're going to take those 4 squares for the top of the coaster and press them in half. And because I want to know what the top of the coaster will look like, I'm going to start by stacking the rectangles for the top of the coaster. The fabric is folded with the right side of the fabric on the outside. And when you're stacking, you need to keep the fabric fold in the center and the raw edges on the outside. Place them all around. And for the last one, lift that first rectangle to scoot it in. Now it's ready to place the backing. And since we're basically looking at the right side or the outside of the coaster, you're going to place the right side of the backing against the outside of the coaster. After you've placed the backing, flip the whole project and make sure the gap in the center is as small as it can be. Then place some pins to keep all those layers in check. Once everything's assembled and pinned, you're ready to sew around the edge. Now, I like to sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance since that gives you some margin for error. Which is nice because when you're working with so many layers, you can easily misalign something, and when you have narrow seam allowance, you might not always catch all the layers. I'm sewing at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the raw edge. My stitch length is 2.5 millimeter. At the corners, put your needle down into the fabric, lift the presser foot and pivot your work. If you find it difficult to hit that 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the raw edge, especially at the corners, I would suggest using something to mark the fabric. Why am I telling you that? Because, well, I wish I did it myself. Because I actually had a little bit of trouble hitting the corners at the right mark. But especially on the last one, I sewed it with a much narrower seam allowance. I did go in and re-sew that. It's easy to fix it, but it's a much smoother sewing experience if you have the markings. After sewing, it's time to clip the corners. This will help you reduce bulk and help you get somewhat pointy corners. To turn the coaster, reach into the little gap in the center and use something like a knitting needle or a chopstick to carefully poke out the corners. And it can be quite tempting to use a bit of force to poke out the corners, but you want to be careful because you might push through the stitches. Once you're happy with the corners, give your coaster a final press. Now you could stop here, but I really like to sew a little cross through the center. And I do that by starting with my sewing needle right in the middle of that little gap. And then starting from the center, I count 4 stitches towards the point of the coaster, pivot my work, go straight back to the center, and then repeat that step for all directions. As I'm sewing, you'll see me pull aside the thread tails, and that's because I'm going to hide them in the back of the project once I'm done. As I'm almost done, I'm not going to do any back tacking. I didn't do it in the start and I'm not going to do it now because once I'm finished with the stitches, I'm going to pull the thread tails to the back using a needle. After I've pulled all the thread tails to the back, I'm going to tie a little knot, rethread a needle. I did have to get a bigger one because there's so many thread tails, and then hide those thread tails in between the layers. And after snipping off the ends, the coaster is done. But if you want, you can make another one where you have the diagonal pattern instead of the checkerboard that this one has. You're going to start with the same amount and the same size of squares as the previous one, but in this case we're going to fold them on the diagonal. After pressing the little squares into triangles, we're going to stack them quite similarly, but in this case, because I don't mind how the pattern works out, I'm just going to lay down the backing first and note that it's with the right side up. After placing all the triangles, I'm going to put in some pins and sew all around the edge at a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then trim the corners. Turn the coaster right side out and poke out the corners. And again, once you're happy with the corners, you could stop here, but I prefer to sew a little cross through the center. For a clean finish, I didn't back tack at the start or the end of the cross. I just pull the thread tails to the back, tie them off and hide them between all the layers.